Do you think the Old Testament is still relevant today?
That's a good question. I like the word relevant because a lot of people know that the Old Testament is a valid biblical book, but is the Old Testament relevant? Does it have meaning for our time today? There's a great verse in Hebrews that talks about this. In fact, it's just Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1. But Paul is talking here, and he says, God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spoke in times past unto the fathers by the prophets. Paul here is referencing the fathers of the Old Testament, the prophets of the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, in fact, I think it's about 300 times in the New Testament is a direct quotation from the Old Testament. So, in fact, when you're reading the New Testament, you might be reading through it and not even realizing that is just pulling somewhere from the Old Testament. But is it still relevant? There's some really important things in the Old Testament that the New Testament references. For instance, when you go to Revelation, it says, "Hear the patience of the saints," right? Revelation 14.
Yeah.
Hear those that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. If you did not have the Old Testament, then would we really know what the full commandments of God really are? No, you need Exodus 20 for that, or Deuteronomy 5. So, is it valid? Yes, I believe it's valid. Is it historically accurate? Yeah, it's proven that over and over again. It's fantastic. There was an article that I read. I think it was on Time magazine or something like that. But it was on an archaeologist, and for hundreds of years, people thought that King David didn't exist, and that was something that was a common thought in today's world as well. But the more that those people keep digging, the more evidence they're finding for the biblical account in the Old Testament, including King David, including all those characters of the old time. So, yes, I believe it's accurate, but relevant, I think, is a word that I'm focusing on that. What would you say the definition of relevant is? Like,
if it relates to something, and especially today.
Okay, so what do you think are some issues today that people are looking for answers to?
Like depression and different things like that. It just wasn't as talked about or known about.
Well, you mentioned depression. When you look at the Bible, I think one of the people that struggled with depression the most was King David, right? And you read through the Psalms, which is the Old Testament again, you'll see David. I mean, there's times when David's praying to the Lord that he is almost even so frustrated with people, he gets murderous. Like he's like, Lord, I'm so mad with these people, I just want to kill them. And I'm like, whoa, David. And he gets really depressed. And then you see in David's writing how when he's praying to the Lord, he can be depressed, he can be angry, he can be sad. And as he's praying, his mood, his whole being, or the Bible says countenance, begins to shift. So, yeah, relevant issues for today, I agree with you, are very similar, if not the same, as they were back in the day. We're humans. There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
We've always dealt with depression. We've dealt with problems when it comes to marriages, relationships. And the Old Testament has stories in them that are lessons for us today. I love history. And, one of the common sayings about history is that those that don't know history are doomed to repeat it, right? And a wise man reads someone else's story and learns from it without having to make the mistake for himself. And the Old Testament is full of those stories.